When billionaire Charles Whitmore turned 82, he realized his wealth had bought him everything except love. Forgotten by his children and used by his grandchildren, he devised a ruthless test. With the help of his doctor and lawyer, he would fake a terminal cancer diagnosis and hide 70% of his fortune. Those who truly cared would reveal themselves when the money vanished. By morning, news of his illness spread, and the vultures began to circle. But Charles wasn't dying. He was wide awake, watching, waiting, ready to see who loved the man, not the money. Welcome to our channel. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support really means a lot. Now, let's get back to the story. When billionaire Charles Whitmore turned 82, his mansion echoed with the kind of silence that money couldn't fill. His children rarely called. His grandchildren reached out only when they needed something. Once celebrated in boardrooms and magazines, Charles was now surrounded by empty halls and fading photographs of people who had long stopped looking back. That night, as the wind howled against his Connecticut estate, Charles made a decision that would alter the balance of his family forever. Standing alone in the glow of the fireplace, he resolved to uncover the truth, to see who among his bloodline still cared when the fortune was no longer within reach. He called two men he still trusted, his physician, Dr. Richard Harrison, and his attorney, Samuel Lewis. Within the hour, their cars pulled up the long driveway, headlights slicing through the fog. Both men entered with confusion written across their faces, uncertain why they had been summoned so late. Charles explained his plan with cold clarity. He would fake an illness, stage for cancer, 3 months to live. The goal was simple but ruthless, to expose the hearts of his family before death actually claimed him. Dr. Harrison was unsettled but intrigued. He understood the pain that had driven this decision. He agreed to prepare convincing medical records, prescriptions, and reports that would withstand scrutiny. Samuel Lewis, ever the strategist, took the idea further. He advised Charles to move 70% of his fortune into a confidential account, one his family couldn't access or trace. If they truly loved him, their concern would remain even without the promise of inheritance. Charles listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When he finally nodded, it wasn't the nod of a dying man, it was the nod of a man reclaiming control. Outside, thunder rumbled across the horizon. Inside, the plan took shape, part deception, part revelation. By dawn, the housekeeper would hear whispers of the billionaire's terminal diagnosis. By noon, his children would be booking flights and rehearsing sympathy. And by nightfall, the great Charles Whitmore would be a man on the verge of death in everyone's eyes, except his own. For the first time in years, he felt awake. Not dying, alive, and ready to see the truth. The fire in the Whitmore study burned low, casting restless shadows across the walls lined with leather-bound books and family portraits. Charles Whitmore sat in his usual armchair, shoulders straight, expression unreadable. Across from him sat Dr. Richard Harrison and attorney Samuel Lewis, the only two men who had seen him age without losing respect for him. The storm outside was relentless, and so was Charles's resolve. He had made up his mind hours ago, but now that the words were out, the silence between them was sharp. He broke it first. He told them he wanted to fake a terminal illness, to test his family's love, to see who among them still had a heart that wasn't bound to his fortune. Dr. Harrison looked at him for a long moment, weary eyes reflecting concern. "You're not well, Charles," he said softly, "but it's not your body that's sick." Charles didn't flinch. "I'm not dying, Richard. I'm disappointed. That's all." He slid a folder across the table, blank medical forms, untouched test results, and empty prescription logs. "You'll fill in the story," Charles said. "Make it sound real. Pancreatic cancer. 3 months to live. No hope for recovery." The doctor hesitated. He'd known Charles for decades, but this was different. "Dangerous. You're asking me to falsify records," he said. Charles's response was steady. "I'm asking you to protect the truth, by hiding it for a while." Lewis had remained quiet until now, hands folded, calculating the implications. If you want to test them, he said finally, you'll need more than a diagnosis. You'll need pressure. Money always reveals character. He opened his briefcase and placed a document on the table. Move 70% of your assets into an untraceable account. Let them believe your estate is being reorganized. Panic will do the rest. A faint smile appeared on Charles's face. That's why I keep you around, Samuel. The storm outside thundered as if approving the plan. Inside the study, a quiet understanding passed between the three men, a pact sealed not by greed, but by truth in disguise. Charles looked toward the flickering fire. Let's see, he whispered, who loves me without my money. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the Whitmore estate washed in pale light. Charles rose early, dressed with precision, and stood before the mirror in his study. His reflection looked calm, even regal, but his eyes carried the weight of the deception he was about to unleash. Dr. Harrison arrived first, briefcase in hand, his face tight with reluctance. The physician had spent his life preserving life, now he was about to help orchestrate a lie about losing one. He set the folder on the desk, forged medical reports, fabricated test results, and a diagnosis that read like a death sentence. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, Harrison said quietly. It'll hold up under any casual scrutiny. But Charles, once this starts, it can't be undone. Charles gave a short nod. Neither can decades of neglect. Minutes later, attorney Samuel Lewis joined them, looking more awake than either man. He placed a sealed envelope beside the doctor's papers. Inside were the first documents for a massive financial restructuring, 70% of Charles's assets transferred into a temporary account known only to Lewis. I've drawn it up, Lewis explained. Your family will believe you're preparing your will, shifting funds for tax reasons. It'll raise questions, the kind that expose intentions. Charles studied the papers, his expression unreadable. For a man who had controlled every aspect of his empire, this moment felt oddly liberating. Let them wonder, he said. Let them reveal themselves. Harrison exhaled slowly. And when they ask questions? Charles turned from the window. I'll answer none. I'll simply live my last 3 months as a dying man waiting for love. The room fell silent. Each man understood the weight of the plan, how truth and illusion were about to intertwine. Outside, sunlight filtered through the tall windows, glinting off the silver frames of family photos, weddings, birthdays, grandkids he barely knew anymore. Charles's gaze lingered on them a moment longer before he turned away. Begin the process, he said. By tomorrow, the world believes I have cancer. By next week, we'll see who still cares. The doctor nodded reluctantly. The lawyer gathered his papers. And as the clock struck 9, Charles Whitmore's quiet war against his own family began. The Whitmore mansion had not seen a full family gathering in years. But that evening, the dining hall gleamed again, the chandeliers lit, the long mahogany table set for 12, and the air thick with uneasy politeness. Charles sat at the head of the table, a quiet observer as his children and their spouses filled the room with forced laughter and clinking glasses. They greeted him with smiles that didn't reach their eyes, the kind reserved for business partners, not blood. His eldest son, Edward, was the first to speak. It's been too long, Dad, he said, tapping his glass. You should host dinners like this more often. Charles smiled faintly. Perhaps I should have, while I still can. The conversation stuttered, then died. All eyes turned to him. The air shifted. Charles took a measured breath, setting down his fork with precision. I've asked you all here, he began, because I have something important to tell you. Even the servants paused at the edges of the room. Dr. Harrison, seated discreetly at the far end, kept his gaze down, the script rehearsed and ready. Charles's voice softened but didn't tremble. A few weeks ago, I had some tests done. The results came back worse than expected. I've been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. A stunned silence followed. No one moved. He continued quietly, the doctors tell me I have 3 months left, maybe less. I didn't want to hide it. You deserve to know. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, his daughter Clara gasped theatrically, clutching her husband's arm. His youngest son, Martin, mumbled, 3 months, while his wife began typing something under the table. Edward leaned forward, trying to sound sympathetic. "That's terrible, Dad. We'll get you the best treatment. Whatever it costs." Charles looked at him carefully. "Money can't fix everything, son." The words hung heavy in the room. Across the table, Attorney Lewis watched silently, already imagining the chaos this lie would unleash. Charles raised his glass, his smile calm but hollow. "To family," he said. "The only thing that truly matters in the end." They echoed his toast, some with genuine sadness, others with calculation. For the first time in years, Charles had their full attention. And he could already see, in their eyes, which of them were about to fail his test. In the days that followed the announcement, the Whitmore mansion became a revolving door of rehearsed concern. Charles had expected pity, what he didn't expect was how quickly it would turn into planning. His eldest son, Edward, arrived the next morning, carrying a bouquet and a folder of pamphlets. They weren't about comfort. They were about high-end hospice options. "You shouldn't be alone in a place this big," Edward said with a salesman's smile. "There are care facilities that handle everything. Medical, meals, end-of-life transitions." Charles listened quietly, pretending frailty. "You think I should leave my home?" Edward hesitated. "Just until you know." Charles nodded slowly, eyes cold behind his polite smile. 2 days later, his daughter Clara made her grand entrance, tears streaming, makeup flawless. She clung to her father for a photo she later posted online with the caption, "Cherish every moment." "Family is everything," the comments poured in with sympathy and emojis, and she soaked in every one of them. Charles saw the post within the hour. The smile that touched his lips wasn't amusement, it was resignation. By the end of the week, his youngest son, Martin, showed up with a business proposal. "I've been thinking," he said, spreading spreadsheets across Charles's bed. "If you're not going to be around long, maybe I should help manage the investments. Keep things running for Mom's memory, you know." Charles stared at the numbers, all projections of his money in someone else's hands. "And what happens if I recover?" he asked softly. Martin looked up, startled. "Well, that'd be great, of course," he said, smiling awkwardly. "Of course," Charles echoed, voice flat. Within 10 days, the entire family had visited. They brought flowers, prayers, and hidden agendas. Behind every hug was calculation. Behind every "how are you feeling?" was a question about inheritance. Through it all, one person remained constant, Emma, his housekeeper of 20 years. She brought him tea each morning, made his favorite soup, and scolded him gently when he pretended not to eat. She never asked about the diagnosis. She never mentioned money. For the first time in weeks, Charles felt something genuine, quiet gratitude. His family was failing the test, but Emma was quietly passing it. 3 weeks passed since Charles Whitmore's diagnosis, and the mansion had grown quieter again. The flood of family visits had slowed to polite weekly calls. Their words of comfort had faded into questions about arrangements, legal documents, and the next steps. Charles listened to every conversation, every subtle probe for financial reassurance, and stored them away like evidence in a trial. He no longer needed to pretend weakness, their indifference did the work for him. But one person remained unchanged. Emma, his housekeeper, arrived every morning with a soft smile and a tray of breakfast she often cooked herself. She opened the curtains, straightened the pillows, and talked to him about the garden, the neighbors, and her grandson who had just started school. She never once mentioned his illness. When Charles tried to bring it up, she waved him off. "You're too stubborn to die, Mr. Whitmore," she said lightly. "I'll believe it when I see it." Her tone made him laugh, the first genuine laugh he'd had in months. That night, Charles sat by the window in his study, watching Emma leave through the side gate. She carried a paper bag, probably leftovers she refused to waste. The sight of her, humble, loyal, and completely uninterested in his fortune, struck him harder than any lie his family had told. He called attorney Lewis. The lawyer arrived the next morning, cautious as always. Charles didn't waste time. "I've seen enough," he said. "Draw up a new will. Everything goes to Emma. The house, the accounts, the company shares, all of it." Lewis blinked. "All of it?" Charles nodded. The others had their chance. They showed me what love looks like when it costs nothing, and what greed looks like when it has everything to gain. Lewis hesitated. "They'll contest it." Charles's expression didn't change. "Then they'll lose more than an inheritance. They'll lose the illusion that they ever mattered to me." He signed the preliminary papers without hesitation. When the lawyer left, Charles stood by the window again. The morning sun filtered through the glass, warm and golden. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. 3 months later, the Whitmore mansion came alive again, not with celebration, but with expectation. Black cars lined the driveway, their polished surfaces reflecting the morning sky. Inside, Charles's children and relatives gathered, dressed in black, whispering condolences they didn't mean. Word had spread that Charles Whitmore had finally passed. The air was thick with rehearsed grief and quiet anticipation. Edward, the eldest, paced near the fireplace, glancing at his watch. "The lawyer's late," he muttered. "He's supposed to read the will today." Clara dabbed at her dry eyes, sighing dramatically. "Maybe he's finalizing the estate papers." Martin poured himself a drink. "Dad's probably left everything in a trust. We'll have to split it, fair and square." They didn't notice the sound of slow footsteps until it was too late. The door at the far end of the hall creaked open. Standing there, alive, steady, and very much aware, was Charles Whitmore. The room froze. Glass slipped from Martin's hand, shattering on the marble. Clara gasped, her makeup cracking with shock. Charles looked at them one by one, calm as ever. "No need to stop the party," he said dryly. "You're all dressed for the occasion." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Edward stammered, "Dad, we thought you died." Charles finished. "I noticed. None of you called in the last month, but you managed to show up for the will." He walked past them slowly, his cane tapping the floor like a judge's gavel. "I told you I had 3 months left," he said. "Turns out, I was right. 3 months was all it took to learn the truth." Attorney Lewis appeared behind him, holding a briefcase. He set it on the table and opened it. "This," he announced, "is the final will of Charles Whitmore." The family leaned forward eagerly. Charles raised a hand. "Don't bother. You won't like the ending." Lewis unfolded the document and read the single line aloud. "I, Charles Whitmore, leave my entire estate to Emma Clark, for loyalty beyond measure." Silence consumed the room. Charles turned toward the door, his voice quiet but firm. "I was sick," he said, "but not dying. Some of you, however, died in my heart." He left them there stunned, speechless, and stripped of every illusion money had ever bought. Outside, Emma waited by the garden gate. Charles smiled faintly. "Let's go home," he said. For once, the mansion finally felt empty for the right reasons. He had found the truth, and it wasn't in his bloodline. Thank you for sticking around to the end. If you like the story, please subscribe to be notified once another story like this is uploaded on the channel.